I had a patient one time, he had lost both arms. He said, "Doc, I just got a letter from my wife. Can you read it to me?" And so I pulled the letter off of his bedstand. I opened the letter, I pull it out, and I start reading. The Department of the Army just notified that you were seriously injured and you lost both arms. And I've really thought about this a lot. I can't stay married to a man without arms. Michael Reeder. I was born in Liberal, Kansas in 1946. And the reason I was born there is because the small town I lived in Oklahoma didn't have a hospital. So I was raised in Oklahoma.
And your family military?
No. Well, my father was World War II and the Korean conflict. He went in at the end of World War II. He worked in radars, and he never left the U.S. With the Korean conflict, he was called back up, and he was sent to Florida. So I was there for probably a year when I was around 4 or 5. Not much of a memory of that.
Did he ever talk about his service at all or no?
No. Well, he would get with his friends, and they would talk about it, and I would kind of hear some of the stories. But it was a little different because his friends were in combat. One was a POW. One was fighting with the Japanese. One was in Europe. So I heard some of those stories.
Give me the little lead up to getting into Vietnam. How did that happen?
Well, so I graduated in 1964, went to a small college in eastern Oklahoma, and wasn't doing well academically. Had no idea what I was going to do with my life, and was reclassified from 2A to 1A, which means I'm eligible for the draft. And I knew that they were going to call me. They'd already drafted my brother, younger than me, by 14 months. And so I went down to a recruiter in my small town and enlisted. And I enlisted with the idea that I wanted to go into physical therapy. And the recruiter told me, no problem. Dressed in his nice uniform. He said, you do your basic training in Fort Bliss, Texas, and then you go to combat medic training in Fort Sam Houston and San Antonio. And then at the end of the combat medic training, you tell the company commander that you're supposed to go to physical therapy school. Naive farm boy, I had no idea that you don't do that. And when I had been in basic training for not longer than 10 minutes, I realized you as a recruit, you don't go to your company commander. So,
okay, after you signed up, how long before you ended up in basic training?
I signed up in December, and it was a deferred enlistment. I went in February of 1967.
At that point, were you tracking the war much, or was it?
No.
You were just
there was, didn't watch much on television. The only thing we watched at the dorm was Batman.
The original serial.
Yeah, wham, bam, that kind of stuff. And that was all. But occasionally I did watch and see some news. I mean, you're 18, 19, 20. You don't care about the news then. And so I really had no idea what all was going on in Vietnam.
All right. Tell me about boot camp. What was that like, day one?
Camp, Fort Bliss, Texas. I was a collegiate gymnast, and my mother had knitted me a sweater, and she had sewn on it my gymnastic letter that I got from the university. And so the moment I get off of the bus at Fort Bliss, the sergeant goes, "Oh, athlete." That's what he called me the rest of the time, athlete. Well, other than the obscenities that he called me as well.
And how was boot camp for you?
Nothing spectacular at all. I mean, I had no idea. Shave your head, that kind of stuff. When we would go for chow at the mess hall, and we would go there for breakfast and we'd go there for dinner. And for lunch, we would have sea rations when we're out training. And before we could go into the mess hall, we had to go through a horizontal ladder. of probably about 40 rails that you swing from one to the other like a monkey. And being a collegiate gymnast and working on the rings and the high bar and the parallel bars, I saw it as a challenge. And so everyone's going one rung to the other until the end. And I get up there and I go rung 1 to rung 3, rung 3 to rung 5. And immediately I got respect, which I wasn't expecting that. I was just doing it because it was a challenge for me, but I got respect.
From both the other guys and the drill sergeant.
And the drill sergeant, yeah. And then there was another gymnast in boot camp training with me, and whenever we were kind of on a break, we would get in handstands and see how far we could walk. And
that's cool.
The sergeants came over and said, "All right, you guys, you smart aleck guys, walk around the whole perimeter here."
So you told me earlier you kind of grew up on a farm, so you were like you were strong in a functional way, not necessarily like weightlifting kind of way.
Yeah, I bucking hay bales at that time. They're the great big round bales now that you use as a skid steer to lift them. When I was younger, it was called bucking hay bales, and you go out there and you grab the barbed wire, you throw the 80-pound bale up onto the truck. If it's wet, it's 80 pounds, and I weighed about 130, so I was strong. And when I was at college, one of the guys on the dorm floor with me, he was on the gymnastic team with me, a New Yorker, strong Brooklyn accent, and he was at our school in Oklahoma. He was a bodybuilder in New York, so he was like this wide down to here and great big biceps, and I'm just kind of this lank, skinny kid, and we would wrestle all the time. And he'd go, "I don't know how you do it. You're a skinny farm kid, and you beat me every single time." And I go, mine is functional. Yours is for show.
Okay, at boot camp, were you at some point did you go, okay, this abuse is just part of the game?
Yeah. It didn't bother me at all. I did what I was told to do. Yeah, just kind of blended in with the crowd.
And after you got your assignment, you never really had C-rats anymore. Your only C-rats, were they at boot camp, basically?
No, when I went to my medic training in Fort Sam Houston and San Antonio, we would get the same thing. We would have breakfast in the mess hall, dinner at the mess hall, and then we'd have C-rats out in the field. Yeah.
What was your, were people trading and swapping?
Oh, of course. I don't remember any of those things, but.
Did you care for the C-rats at all, or were they just okay?
I mean, they were okay, I mean, you're a young kid. You just want something in your stomach. and I couldn't believe they always came with a pack of cigarettes, like a mini pack. Instead of the thick pack, it was a mini pack, and I think I had maybe 5 or 6 cigarettes in it. Talk about contributing to lung cancer.
Yeah. Okay, so you finish up boot camp.
Finished up boot camp and went by bus from Fort Bliss, Texas to San Antonio to Fort Sam Houston. And did, at that time, is combat medic training. This is 1967, so we're talking about February, March. We're talking about April. And they needed medics in Vietnam. So all of the training that I got was basically focused on being a combat medic in Vietnam. And the training, we had rubber injuries. They weren't even realistic looking for the most part. Oh, we're going to strap on a fractured femur on your leg and you treat it and that kind of stuff. But and the training that I got at Fort Sam Houston did not prepare me at all for what my ultimate work was going to be. But let me mention there was a couple of things that happened to me at Fort Sam Houston. So I was engaged to be married, and I was going to be on leave for 30 days right after I finished my medic training, and I needed to earn money. And I mentioned to you last night that I'm kind of ballsy. So to earn money, so here I am with this recruit, a shaved head still, I'm not even a PFC yet. And I decided that I was going to go around the enlisted quarters and knock on doors and ask people if there were any jobs that I could do that I could earn some extra money to go for my marriage. And I kept getting turned down and went to this one house, knocked on the door, told the story. No, I don't think we need anything. Walking down the sidewalk, and I hear this, excuse me, talking with my husband, and yes, we could use your help. So I went there, and that day I mowed the lawn for them, went back to the barracks, and they said, come back next week. So next week I went back, I cleaned out the garage, I mowed the backyard, cleaned the windows on the outside, and then they said, why don't you finish your training on Friday? Why don't you just come over Friday after training and spend the weekend with us? And I went, wow, a chance to get out of the barracks. And so I did that. So I cleaned house for them. I set the table. She cooked everything. There's a couple from Louisiana.
Wow.
Oh, gumbo. I learned about gumbo from them. And they adopted me. It was a phenomenal experience.
Did you remain friends with them over a long period of time?
Let me tell you about that. So one day they asked me, Michael, would you like to go with us? We're going to go visit some friends on this other side of San Antonio. And I'm going, I get to get off base. And so I sit in the back seat of the car. She's driving. He was on medical leave from Vietnam because he had some kind of internal disease that they hadn't quite figured out what it was yet. He was an E8. I'm not even a PFC yet. So I get in the back seat and we're driving through San Antonio and we get to a particular neighborhood that we're going to drive through. And the mother or the wife said to me, Michael, do you see that blanket in the back seat beside you? And I said, yes. And she said, you're going to have to lie down in that space between the front seat and the back seat and cover yourself with the blanket. That was my first exposure to racism. They were black. I was white. And we were going to go through a white neighborhood. And for their protection and my protection, I had to cover myself.
Wow.
And where I was raised in this small town in Oklahoma, we didn't have any black people. We didn't have any Hispanics. It was all basically Caucasian. So I knew nothing about that. And when I finished my training, they gave me a wedding gift wrapped in paper. And I went from there to get onto the plane. The stewardess told me that I can't take that back to my seat. She said, leave it up here in this closet where you first get onto the plane. And I did. And when I got off of the plane, it wasn't there. I never knew what the gift was. I never heard anything more from that couple. But they taught me so much. So much.
Cool experience.
Yeah.
The schooling there, did you enjoy it? Did you learn a lot? Or you just felt like, or at the time, did you know that this was going to be, you probably didn't know whether that was going to be applicable to what you
I had no idea. You know, they were telling us, you know, this is some of the stuff that you're going to experience in Vietnam. I had no idea. I had no idea.
And at that point, you thought you were going to be a medic on a helicopter or in a...
I didn't even know that. I didn't even know where I would be going or what I would be doing. I assumed I was going to be a medic. But I had 2 years of college. And so I didn't even have to study. I didn't study any of that stuff. You know, it was boring. The videos they showed us were not professionally done. And, you know, you've been training in the heat in San Antonio and the humidity. It was a great time to fall asleep, which I did numerous times. There was one experience that happened to me, and I mentioned this to you yesterday. So we were in a classroom, and this is all, a lot of it was old stuff. Our barracks was World War II, fire trap. But anyway, we're in a classroom, and there were probably 6 or 8 tables that would be the equivalent of a chemistry table in a high school lab. And there were probably 16 of us in the room. We were divided into groups of 2, and it was a class on giving injections. So the sergeant explains to us, everything that you have to do. It's all by the number. Number 1, this, number 2, 3, 4. So we get to the time. I'm the first one down, and I'm supposed to lean over the table, pull my pants down, expose my butt. I'm leaning over the table. The sergeant says, number 1, wipe the butt with an alcohol swab. Number 2, pick up your saline capsule. Number 3, get your syringe, inject the needle into the saline capsule, withdraw to X amount, and then when I give you the command on 3, I want you to inject into your partner. So the sergeant goes 1, 2, 3. I didn't feel a thing. Didn't feel a thing. The sergeant comes back to the guy and goes, "What? You didn't give him the injection?" And the guy's going, "I couldn't do it, Sergeant. I couldn't do it." "What do you mean you can't do it?" "I couldn't do it. You goddamn will push that syringe into his butt." And I'm lying there listening to all of this. "And if you can't do it, I'll hold your hand and push it in. I'm going to count to 3 again." And he goes 1, 2, 3, and I felt the jab go in, and it came out, and he jabbed me again because it didn't go all the way in the first time.
Oh, my goodness.
And I mentioned that in 1976, 7 years after I was out, 76. 6 years after I was out of the military, I went to nursing school. And there were 4 of us male nurses, and the rest were female, and we were paired up. And the same thing happened to me again. Couldn't do it. But
and there you were, waiting for it.
Waiting for it.
How did that schooling end up there? How did that end, and what happened?
What with
you doing the medic school?
So at the end of the assignment, then we were sitting in an auditorium. There are about 100 of us that have been trained as combat medics. Out of the 100, 2 of us were sent to Japan, myself and one other guy. The rest went to Germany, and they're all going, "Whoa, Germany!" No one went to Vietnam at that time. And later, all of those that went to Germany basically ended up in Vietnam. And the reason that I'm sure the military knew that, and the reason that I wasn't sent to Vietnam and went to Japan was because my younger brother, my only sibling, was already in Vietnam.
When you heard the Japan assignment, what went through your mind? Did you know anything about it?
I didn't know anything about Japan, knew nothing. So as soon as I finished that training, I was on my leave. I got married July the 1st. We'd been engaged for about a year and a half. And July 10th, I was sent to Japan.
How did you get over there?
By plane, and went from California to Alaska, Fairbanks, I believe, and then from Alaska into Japan.
Did you go by yourself, or did the other guy who got called there go with you?
I think I was by myself. I don't remember. It was a civilian plane.
Okay. And what do you remember when you got to Japan? Did you go right to the assignment?
I landed at Haneda Airport in Japan, and I think that I don't remember much about that. I was probably picked up by some military transportation, and then I was taken to the hospital. And I remembered when I got to the hospital, I was looking at, these are gray buildings, gray concrete buildings. And I went, wow, that's a really interesting design on all of the sides of the buildings. And it looked like the backs of turtle shells. And I mentioned that a few days later to someone, and they said, that's not by design. Those are cracks caused from the earthquakes.
Oh, my. Describe that camp and what it was called.
So it was a hospital, Army hospital, and that's all it was. Uh, it was built, I think, during the Korean War, and it was a barracks that housed a lot of the personnel from Korea. It wasn't necessarily an R&R center, but it was a barracks, and the title of it was Kishine Barracks. And so you would hear uniformly people say Kishine Barracks, they're talking about the hospital. It's called the 106 General Hospital. They would think Kishine Barracks. It's 35 acres, 18 buildings, and it's just the hospital and the motor pool to transport the patients from the helicopters to the wards. And we had 4 wards, A, B, C, D. A, I believe, was infectious diseases, mostly malaria. Seriously ill malarial patients, because they would treat them in Vietnam as well. And then B, I think, was head and abdominal wounds. C was the burn ward. And D was orthopedics. And my first 6 months I spent on C, Ward 2, in burns. And the rest of my time, 2.5 years, was spent on D ward in orthopedics.
And actually describe one of those buildings, like the C ward.
It's a long rectangular building, 4 stories high, open bays all the way through. About a third of the way is a stairwell coming in, and 2/3 of the way there's another stairwell coming in. So there's entrance and exit in case of fires or earthquakes or something like that. And then the rest was just open bays and filled with beds on both sides. We did have one ward. It was a septic ward. These are people that are seriously wounded and grossly infected. So you would have to go into there gowned and masked and gloved. And that had a wall, a wooden wall constructed to separate those patients from the rest of the ward. And each floor had 60 patients. Sometimes, depending upon the size and the intensity of the battle in Vietnam, we could have as many as 70 patients. And we had that oftentimes. We would have times where there would be so many patients coming in that they would be on litters on the floor because we didn't have enough beds.
And when you first started, they didn't have elevators in those buildings.
They didn't have elevators in the building. And the corpsmen would have to go down to the helicopters, and we would unload the patients from the helicopters and take them back up to the ward. And that's how I got my hearing loss, from being around the helicopters. The crew chief was wearing hearing protection. The co-pilot and the pilot had hearing protection, but us corpsmen did not have the hearing protection.
And they would go. The airport was a ways away where they would land.
So they would come from Vietnam, and it's about a 6-hour flight. They would fly out of Tan Son Nhut or Cam Ranh Bay, I believe, and a 6-hour flight. And you did an episode on that with a flight nurse. And in fact, that's how I found out about Ask a Vet. Anyway, 6-hour flight, they would land at Tachikawa Air Force Base, or they would land at Yokota Air Force Base. And then originally in 1966, when the hospital was opened, and until the early part of 1967, they would bus the patients. And that was a 3-hour bus ride. And we're talking about seriously ill patients, seriously wounded. And there was a helicopter pilot at one of these bases, and he saw what was happening to these patients, and he said, "We've got to get a dust-off unit into here." And he famously petitioned for that and got basically worn-out helicopters from Vietnam when they first started, and started bringing the seriously injured patients directly from Tachikawa or Yokota into our hospital.
And you told me that the landing area was...
Oh, the landing area. The guy that started the dust-off coming into our hospital said it was the most precarious landing. And they would land day and night. They would bring the burn patients in at night. And
because the space, right, there was buildings, there was a water tower.
It was very small. There's 4-story buildings all around it. There's a water tower. And he said it was the most dangerous thing that he had to do outside of Vietnam. And he had been in Vietnam. And what was the size? Maybe half a football field. Yeah.
Wow.
So let me give you a little background on this. So in Vietnam at their peak, they had a little over 5,000 beds available for patients. And depending upon the skirmishes, and especially Tet, there would be so many patients coming in that they would have to get the patients in, get them triaged, get them in, and get them evacuated quickly. So in Japan, we had the 106th General Hospital, which is 1,000 beds, the 249th General Hospital, 1,000 beds. Camp Zama was originally a 400-bed hospital, and it was the hospital for all of the Japan. And they didn't take that many patients from Vietnam, but they expanded to 700. And then Camp Drake, no, not Camp Drake, Camp Oji, the 7th Field Hospital, had 400 beds. And so during the 3 years, so Department of Defense said officially, and you and I talked about this yesterday, and we both know the number is small. The likelihood it's much larger, but the DOD says that there were 303,000 injuries in the Vietnam War, of which 150,000 of those, how interestingly, only half, were evacuated to hospitals, basically in Japan. There were some that were taken to Okinawa, some that were taken to Guam, but they were not the crux of the evacuations. So I calculated we had more than 45,000 patients come through my hospital in the 3 years I was there.
Wow. Talk a little bit. What was the designation? What would mean you'd stay in Vietnam to be treated versus come to Japan?
So they triage patients. And when you do a triage, those that are most likely to survive are the first ones treated. Second likely are the second ones treated. Those that probably will not survive are the last ones to be triaged, because the function in reality is to get them back into the field. And so if they could be rehabilitated within a few days to a couple to 3 weeks, they would stay in Vietnam. And if they were going to be more seriously injured, amputations, severe shrapnel wounds like that, they were put on the plane and evacuated to us. So we would get burn patients would come to us within 18 hours of their injury. And the others, we would get anywhere from 2 days to 5 days after they were injured. And they would come to us, depending on how quickly and how full the beds were in Vietnam, they would evacuate them quickly. And we oftentimes got the patients still with the grime on them from their wounds in Vietnam.
Do you remember your first impression when you walked into the hospital?
My first assignment was on the burn ward. I'd never seen a burn. I'd never even been with a patient. I was not prepared for that. When you're seriously burned all over your body, your head looks like a basketball. Your testicles are the size of grapefruit. And you're swelling up from fluid retention. And so they do a surgical procedure in which they would surgically slice the arms all the way from upper to lower arm, and the legs the same way, so the fluids would have a chance of escaping. So you're pouring fluids in by IV, and those fluids are leaching out. The bed sheets are saturated with fluid. And that was the first thing that I saw. Wow. So the first day there, after seeing this, I'm assigned to another corpsman, and I follow him, watch what I do. The second day, I was given my own patient. When you've been burned, you have dead tissue, and the dead tissue is what harbors infection. And since your skin is open, the infection is what kills you. It's not the burn. If you survive the burn, it's the infection that's probably going to kill you. And so we put them in a whirlpool. Well, they're given Demerol or they're given morphine, and they're taken into the whirlpool, put into the whirlpool to be able to soak for a period of time. And then I come in, and my job is to debride, to cut off the dead tissue. So I have my patient in the whirlpool, and I open up my suture kit just like I saw the day previous. I pull out my scalpel, pull out my tweezers, and I couldn't start on his arms because he could see me. He could see me shaking. And I start debriding. And typically, this would happen to everyone. Screaming, Doc, just kill me. Get it over with. Just get it over with. Every single burn patient, seriously burned, said the same thing. And then I came across on the internet, one of the patients wasn't my patient, but he was there at the time that I was. And he said, if someone would have given me a gun, I would have killed myself right there. But he said, I endured it. And he says, look, I can move my fingers now. I can move my arm. And he said, I don't know how those guys, the corpsmen, could do what they do. So I was 6 months doing that. And then
that was a big open room. So you were hearing, there was a lot of pain going on in there.
Pain and death. You know that some of these guys aren't going to make it. And, they're gone. There's nothing you can do. So there were more, the war was picking up, and there were more other kinds of injuries. Well, let me give you a side note. The majority of the burns, over 50% of the burns that were coming into us were by accident. And one of the biggest contributors to that was in Vietnam, you have your places where you poop, and under where you poop, there's a 55-gallon barrel cut in half. Someone has to go burn that. And so you're supposed to pour on diesel or kerosene. But some of these guys didn't know. They weren't being supervised. They pour gasoline on it. The vapors are surrounding them. They throw a match to it, and it explodes, and they're enveloped in flames and burned seriously all over their body. The other type of injury that we got that was really, they're all cruel, but this is slow death. The Viet Cong would booby-trap, make electrical booby-traps. They would go to a power line, like a big power line, bring a cable down, bury it underground, hook it up to something that some GI may say, oh, that's a great souvenir for me to take home. They reach down to pick it up, and it's grounded, and they've got steel toes and heels in their boots. They've got metal buckle on their stomach. They've got chevrons on their neck that are metal. And all of a sudden, that's where they're electrocuted, all of those places. And so when the current goes through your body, everything looks okay for the most part. They would come in and their feet are already black. So they're going to lose their feet. But then a day later, the burn on their belly is expanding because the tissue that has been exposed to that current is gradually dying.
And you saw a lot of that.
I saw a lot of that, yeah. A lot of that.
Was that called something in particular or just?
Bad luck.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah. So the war was picking up, and the types of injuries that were predominant then were orthopedic. And so I was transferred to an orthopedic ward. And that's where I stayed the remainder of my 3 years. I was there for 2.5 years.
And orthopedic generally, in the military sense, in the hospital sense, what did that mean?
Gunshot wounds and bombs, explosions. So there were a little over 5,000, according to DOD, a little over 5,000 amputees in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. The majority of those were amputees of one limb, but there were 2 limbs, there were 3 limbs, and there were even some 4 limbs. There were 7 that lost all 4 limbs. And so I worked on hundreds, if not thousands, of amputees. And when a bomb goes off, a claymore or whatever, it doesn't make a nice, clean amputation. So they would come to us and the flesh is torn off and it blasts dirt and debris into the flesh. And so they're contaminated, they're infected. And so we had to do the treatments on them. So an interesting thing, I can't speak for all of the wards. I can only speak. Before I do that, I do want to say this, and I've talked to you about this. I am so honored to be doing this interview. I've waited 56 years for this moment. I've spent years on the internet looking for information about what was done in Japan. And there's nothing. And when you did the interview on the flight nurse, I knew I had to reach out to you because I have a part of the story that hasn't been told and needs to be told. And so I'm honored to be here. I'm doing this for the other hospitals in Japan. I'm doing it for the other nurses and doctors in corpsmen and for all of the patients that we had. And I'm doing it for their wives and for their kids and their grandkids that they can hear this story. So back to the ward. Yeah, the patients that we got, just unbelievable.
Give me some of the first impressions when you went to that ward. What do you remember that stands out from your initial time there?
So immediately what stands out, and the orientation was just like in the burn ward, one day with another corpsman that's been there for a while, and then you're on your own. And I learned where the septic ward was and what you had to do to get in there, and you stayed in there all day long. The food was brought to you. You didn't come out because they didn't want to contaminate or cross-contaminate the other patients. And then the most seriously injured are the ones that are closest to the nursing station. So that's probably, I'm guessing, 16 to 18 beds on each side of this rectangular building. Then you have the nurses' station, and then you have a shower area, the bathroom area, which few patients were able to use because of their injuries. And then we had the area where the bedpans were kept and cleaned and that kind of stuff. And then the next seriously injured were in the next bay. And then the last bay was the ones that were ambulatory. They might have a minor dressing change they needed. Some of them would eventually go back to Vietnam. If there were too many being evacuated, they didn't have enough beds in Vietnam, they would be sent to us. And they were in wheelchairs. They could get around.
Talk about the personnel in the hospital. How many people were on a ward
So
typically?
on a typical ward in our orthopedic ward, and so we had the first floor was orthopedics, second floor orthopedics, third floor was orthopedics, and the fourth floor were ones that were going to, I'm assuming, go back to Vietnam quickly. I never got to the fourth floor. Never. In the 3 years I was, 2.5 years I was on that ward. I never got up there. I didn't have time. But the personnel that we had, there were usually 2 surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, assigned to our floor. There was usually, each day there would be one on duty and one is not on duty. At night, we didn't have a doctor. They were on call and they could come in if they had to. This is before pagers.
Right.
So it's a phone call. We had a head nurse. We had an assistant nurse. And based upon the intensity of patients that we had coming in, we would even have a civilian nurse. We had a ward sergeant, his job, and an assistant ward sergeant. Their job was to take care of all of the materials that we needed, the beds, the dressings, the sutures, everything else. And then corpsmen, there were usually 4, at max 6 of us. So that's 4 to 6 that were doing all the patient care. The nurses, again, in Vietnam, I think it was different. And I'm assuming what I'm going to describe now was similar to what I had on my ward. The nurses took care of the admissions and the dismissal of the patients. They took care of the paperwork. They did the nursing notes. They took care of blood. They took care of the IVs. They took care of putting in the IVs and changing the fluids. They didn't do patient care. They would give the injections and give the medications, but they didn't do patient care. That was all done by the corpsmen.
And you said there was a difference you found a lot in the guys who had enlisted versus draftees.
Yeah. The draftees, and I mentioned to you yesterday that in 1967, when I went there, and half of 1968, the feeling was different than it was after the second half of 68, 69, and 70.
Is that after Tet?
Yeah. And that was the feeling about the war. These were corpsmen that were being drafted, that they didn't want to be there, and they didn't want to be doing what they were doing, and they were single. I was married. I had my wife there, and their focus was on going out and getting drunk and getting laid on the weekends and then coming back to work and working through a hangover. And the nurses picked up on that real quick. And so they would be given patients with minor needs. The patients that had serious needs and serious care would be given to myself and to another corpsman. So I had a huge patient load every single day.
And you talked about the training didn't necessarily prepare you for any of this.
No, none.
So you were relying on you said you read books at places, you looked stuff up, and you're just winging it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I had to do things for the patients, and I'm a very intuitive person. Remember, I told you the story about I needed to earn money.
Yeah.
When I was in my medical training, and I'm a very intuitive person. And I wanted to do more for the guys. And so I kept asking for more, and the nurses would give me more and more responsibility. And if I needed help with something, they would show me, and then I would go and they would explain it, and I would go and implement it. And one time I was at a Japanese department store in Takashimaya in Yokohama, and I found a section that had some English books. And one of them was basically a textbook on orthopedics. I bought it. I didn't understand half of the words. I had to have a dictionary to look up the words. And I learned so much more about orthopedics from that book. And I would take it back and implement that. And I was describing to you how the nurses never taught me this, And I'm not even sure if they knew, but there would be things that I would hear from the doctors. I would ask a question when they were making their rounds, and I'd ask a question, and they were talking about, yeah, you have to shape the stump into a cone shape so the prosthetic device will be able to slide onto their leg later. And so I developed a technique when I would finish their dressing change to wrap the stump with an ace bandage. If it's a lower leg, I'd use a 4-inch ace bandage. If it's an upper leg, I'd use a 6-inch ace bandage. And I would start it around the thigh and bring it around the stump, and I would put a little pressure on that, bring it around the thigh, bring it around the other side, put a little pressure there. So the pressure was going from the end of the stump up to start to shape it into a cone. And because of that stuff that I did, and I kept picking up and wanting more and more and more, they kept giving me more and more.
What was the shift like? I mean, how would the work days go for you?
So a typical shift was 7 to 3, 3 to 11, and 11 to 7. The first half year I was there were a couple of times that I was on the night shift. But the night shift, the patients are asleep. They're occasionally, Doc, I need some Darvon, a pain reliever. And so you go and tell the nurse, and she gives you a couple of Darvon to take back to the patient. You go and you watch the patients because they were still allowed to smoke.
Wow.
And they're on medications, and they'd fall asleep with a cigarette in their mouth or in their hand, and you got to watch and make sure that the cigarette doesn't cause a fire. But that was minimal. That wasn't, you weren't doing dressing changes. That's what's keeping the patient alive. And
so you preferred the day shift for that reason?
They wanted me there, so they stopped putting me on night shift because they wanted their more experienced personnel working where they needed it the most.
You received a lot of satisfaction out of doing that.
Yeah. I remember I told you about going through the monkey bars, the horizontal bars in basic training, and I got respect. I wasn't looking for it. It was something that came to me as a result of what I did. It was an honor. I got the same thing with the patients that I worked with.
The team you worked with, the nursing, the doctors, was it kind of a well-oiled machine? Everybody kind of had each other's back, and
everyone knew their job. Everyone knew their job.
I'm assuming a lot of even for the doctors, if you're a surgeon, you probably did something completely different. You weren't expecting to go over there and start working on these patients that have been blown up or anything. So I'm sure everyone was kind of improvising. Just
everyone. The doctors weren't even working sometimes. In the orthopedics, they were orthopods. They were orthopedic surgeons. But, Ron Glasser from the 249th General Hospital, he was a pediatrician, and he worked in surgery. You had niches that you had to fill, and you take what you could to fill that niche. So let's go back to shifts. So normally we would be a 3-shift day. An 8-hour shift. But when the battles peaked, and especially during Tet and all of 68, and probably easily a third to almost a half of 1969, we were on 12-hour shifts 6 days a week because we had so many patients coming in. And so I would work 12 hours, basically nonstop. We had a food cart that would bring the food up to the floor. And then we, as the corpsmen, one of our jobs, we changed the beds, we sent out bedpans, we took out urinals, we did the patient care, we changed the dressings. A couple of times I had to put my thumb on an artery and wait for the surgeon to come in and close off the artery. That was how divergent our responsibilities were. And so if a patient was in surgery, the mess hall wouldn't get that information, and so there would be a tray on the food cart for him. and I would take it into the bathroom, and then back and forth between my patients, I would go in and, snack on a little bit of food. And it was just nonstop all day long. But it made the time go so fast.
Yeah, but that was really meaningful time, honestly.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the patients, your experiences on the orthopedic floor.
Serious and humorous. I had a patient one time, he had lost both arms. I don't remember if it was at the humorous level or what, but he said, "Doc, I just got a letter from my wife. Can you read it to me?" And so I pulled the letter off of his bedstand. I opened the letter, I pull it out, and I start reading, "Dear," I don't remember any of my patients' name except one, Luis, and I could tell you about him later. I don't remember. Intuitively, no one taught me that. But it's just like the guys in Vietnam. You don't want to know anything about the guy beside you because he may not be there tomorrow or the next day or the day after. And it's the same with the patients. So I would hear their stories. I would hear them talk about their wife or their girlfriend or the car they're going to buy when they get back home, et cetera, et cetera. But I just let it go in and go out. I don't remember any of their names. "Doc, can you read the letter to me from my wife?" And I open up the letter and I'm reading, "Dear X, the Department of the Army just notified that you were seriously injured and you lost both arms. And I've really thought about this a lot. I can't stay married to a man without arms. I'm filing for divorce." How do you? Look how it affects me.
Brutal.
Imagine him. And how do I put the letter in the envelope back on the nightstand and walk away from that?
Man, did you see it coming when you started reading and
No,
think?
I had no idea.
You just, oh man.
Nor did he.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So many things like that. I had a patient. Oh, he was bitter. He was bitter. He went to Vietnam. He survived the year, went back, got into the National Guard. Guess what? The Guard got called up and got sent to Vietnam. And this time he lost a leg. And he was bitter, bitter. I had a patient. I mean, military's taking anything. What, we have 500,000 troops over there at the height of the war? I had a patient somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains. You're going to think that I'm making this up. But the guy calls me over and he goes, Doc, you got any bar grease? These here wires is itching me, and I need something to keep them from itching me. I need some bar grease. So apparently in the Appalachian Mountains, they use something like that. Have so many. And I had a patient that was an auctioneer before he went into the military, drafted. And he was in good spirits. He lost both legs at the hip. And to do his treatment, I would put one arm under his buttocks and lift it up so I could pull off the bandages from the open wound, and I could irrigate them with neomycin and antibiotic solution. And then I could put on the sterile gauze pads, and then I wrapped the 6-inch ace bandages around both stumps. But he was an auctioneer, and someone needed a urinal. And he goes, Doc, give me the urinal. So I give him the urinal, and he starts auctioning off the urinal to the highest bidder. 1 cigarette, 2 cigarettes. I need it worse. I'll give you the whole goddamn pack.
Isn't that really fast language, the
Oh,
auctioneer
yeah,
language?
yeah. Give me 5. Give me 10. That kind of thing. Yeah. So we had humorous moments, and we had some really dark moments. I had a patient, this was during the Tet Offensive. And remember, I told you about the 5,000 plus beds and the triage. Their beds were full. They needed to get patients out. And if a patient was on that third category, he's not going to live, but he's going to live long enough that we really need the bed space here in Vietnam for Category 1 and Category 2. So we're going to put him on a plane to Japan. And so he arrived at our hospital, came up onto our ward on a litter, and we had to put him on a striker frame.
Explain that.
Striker frame is a bed about this wide, metal frame, canvas, opening for so you can defecate, or if you're flipped over so you can urinate, and then a place for your head, and then a little canvas band so you can support your head if you're face down or face up.
So it'll let you rotate him.
And it lets you rotate him over so he doesn't get bed sores, or you can treat, in his case, a colostomy on the front side or his wound on the back side. So we got him onto the striker frame. He was grossly infected, and we pushed him back into the septic ward, and he was my patient for a week. I'm gowned up. I've got my mask on. I've got my gloves. When I did the treatment on him, the first, he had the bandage over his back. That's what I was seeing. A Puerto Rican boy from Brooklyn, New York. And there's nothing wrong. There's the back of his torso. There's his arms, a little bruising here. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing on his head. There's his legs. There's nothing wrong there. And I take off the abdominal pad, which is the cover over the actual dressing. And then I start taking off the dressing. And from the right side of his buttocks to the left side of his buttocks, it's a gigantic crater in which he's missing that much space out of his back. He's basically been cut in half. The only thing that's holding him together is the skin and a little bit of abdominal muscle on his front side. And I said he was already grossly infected. The urine bag was full of urine and pus. And I'm with him for a week. He's my patient. And he was still lucid. And so, he develops a little bit of confidence with me. And, Doc, have you got any mirrors so I can see my wound? And so he says that to me, and I'm thinking, you're never going to walk again. You don't have that much spinal column. You're never even going to be in a wheelchair. You're not even going to live. That's what I'm thinking. And then I respond and say, no, we don't have any mirrors. That injury haunts me to this day. He survived the 7 days, but I know he's dead. There's no way he could survive that.
Did he leave the hospital? Did they ship him to California or something?
I have no idea. They go into California and then from California,
Wow.
So they knew from triage that moment in Vietnam. It seems like a cruel thing to do, but the war is the machine. The function has to be on taking care of the ones that are going to survive first.
And you said the constant you were constantly getting patients. The helicopters, the buses were dropping off.
Think about it. A 1,000-bed hospital without a doubt more than 45,000 patients in 3 years. Where are the intensity of those patients going? Oh, I forgot. Part of there was a psych ward also. They're not packed like we are. The infectious disease ward is not packed like we are. We're getting the crux of the patients in bombs and gunshot wounds. And
talk a little bit about, you said something to me earlier that there was no rank played no part, or your status played no part in the care you got.
You were a patient. We had colonels come in. We had majors, captains, lieutenants came in. We had all ranks of enlisted.
You said you had CIA guys.
We had CIA. We had in our hospital during the huge battles with large numbers of casualties, we had Army, we had Navy, we had the Marines, we had CIA, we had officers, we had enlisted. Rank played no part of that. And occasionally we would get an officer that would come in that would think that he was entitled to something, and that would get pushed down real quick. If he wouldn't deal with us as a corpsman, then the head nurse, who's a captain, would come in and stop that real quick.
What was the most frustrating thing for you there in just dealing with the day-to-day?
The whole thing was frustrating.
Just the carnage,
the intensity.
Yeah.
So many patients and so serious wounds. And for what? So I won't even get into that yet. We'll deal with that later. And that's when I went back to the States. But frustrating, one of the things that I've mentioned before, the full colonel, the hospital commander, came one day to present a Purple Heart and a promotion to a patient. And what I was told, and that was the policy, and I just saw something the other day where one of the people that was killed, one of the female people that was killed in Iran, she was posthumously given a promotion. And anyway, so the policy was that if you were a triple amputee, you got an automatic promotion. So the colonel came into our ward, and I had 2 patients in this. This is the seriously injured ones, and they're side by side, both my patients. And he goes over to the wounded patient that had lost 3 extremities, and this patient had lost both legs below the knee. He would walk again with prosthetic devices, and he had lost one hand. By definition, it was 3 amputations. And he was awarded a Purple Heart and an automatic promotion. In the bed next to him was a patient that had lost both legs above the knee and undoubtedly would never walk again. And he had lost all of his hand except for the thumb. So in reality, he was going to be more incapacitated for the rest of his life than this one over here that by definition was a triple amputee. That's frustration. That shows no empathy. That shows we live by the book.
And you told me another story about the commanding officer that.
Yeah, so my focus is on taking care of my patients. That's what I'm there for. Doc, I need this. I would work all day long. They call me the runner because I'm doing fast walk back and forth. If I had a step reader on my hand, we're probably talking 30,000 steps a day. Anyway, I'm taking care of my patients. And, it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So they've got cigarettes, they're smoking, their sheets are crumpled. They may have some food stains on their sheets from lunch. Their bedstand has a urinal sticking on it. Their little nightstand that goes over the bed's got the water pitcher there and maybe a cup and who knows what else. And the ward sergeant comes out and goes, "Reader, you need to clean everything up." The colonel's coming to present an award. And I went, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, get everything cleaned up. Make everything look orderly, make it look clean." And I'm facing the sergeant, and the door coming into our ward opens behind me, which I did not know. And I'm saying to the sergeant, "I really need to do this?" And the voice behind me says, "Yes, son, I think you do." And I turn around, and it's the colonel. And he let it slide. He could have busted me there. He could have just really put me down, but he let it slide. So that was love.
So he cared still a lot about military protocol.
Yeah.
And you're worried about
I'm worried about
patients.
patient care.
Yeah.
That's the function of the hospital.
So on a normal shift, how many patients were you personally dealing with? Probably half the ward?
No, not that many. Remember, these guys are seriously wounded, and some would not survive. So I would have, if they were really bad cases, like the one that I described, the Puerto Rican,
mm-hmm.
he and a couple of others in the septic ward were my patient for that week. So that's 3 patients.
Of course, the septic ward, that's really intense.
Yeah, and it's full-time. And in my shift, I would have to do 2 dressing changes. And so I would have anywhere from 6 to 12 patients each day. And there's 2 dressing changes that I have to do in one shift, in a day shift.
At the end of the day, were you just worn out? Did sleep come easy, or was it that were you worked up? What would be the...
No. So I lived off base, and it was probably 3/4 of a mile away from the hospital. I lived in a little Japanese apartment, and usually I would walk home in the rain, not rain, whatever. Remember the path leading up to my house?
Yeah.
That walk would give me a chance to debrief. I didn't realize it at the time. It's that intuitive stuff that has come to me all throughout my lifetime. And then one time I thought, I could make it home a little faster if I had a bicycle. So I had a paper route when I was 12 years old. I've always worked. And the bicycles back in the early 60s were reverse brakes.
Yeah.
You pedal forward, and you want to stop, you reverse the pedal. I had never had a multi-speed bicycle with hand caliper brakes. Knew nothing about it. But I got it, and I would ride my bicycle home in the daytime. Well, one time it was raining, and it's downhill from the hospital. It's probably 1/3 of a mile down to a major intersection with a stoplight. I've never ridden a bicycle with caliper brakes in the rain. So I'm getting down to where I would normally stop. Bicycle is wet, the rubber tires are wet, and the caliper brakes are doing nothing. Oh my God, whoa, squeezing as hard as I can, and nothing is happening. And I just get to the intersection, which is a red light, and it dries off the back tire and the front tire enough for me to stop. I never rode that bicycle again. I'd walk.
Talk about, was it harder or easier being married and working that? I mean, what would you say? I know you told me your wife didn't really want to, she wanted you to leave that there.
So there were a lot of things about it. It isolated me. So all of the corpsmen are single. They're going to get drunk and get laid. That's not me. I don't drink. I wouldn't do that. And the rest are E7s, E8s, and by now, when I got to Japan, I became a PFC. Very shortly after that, I became an E4, then I became an E5, but I didn't have anything in common with the older ward sergeants, and the nurses are officers, and we're not supposed to fraternize with them. So in that respect, I was isolated. With my wife, when I first got there, so I got there early July. My wife got there at the end of September. And I had been taking pictures of my patients' wounds because I wanted to learn about this stuff to be more effective. And I showed my wife some of these pictures. And she said, "Don't you ever show me anything like that again. And don't ever talk about what you do at the hospital here with me." And for years, that just pushed everything down inside. And for years, I held that against her until I finally realized that's not her job. It's not her fault. And I could accept that, even though I had blamed her for so long, because I had no one to talk to. So that's the military way. You just take it and you just shove it down inside and live with it and go on. And then when we were on 12-hour shifts, I would come home and I'm exhausted. I need to go right to bed. I'd eat something, go right to bed, wake up in the morning. I don't know why, but I spit shine my shoes every day for 3 years and go to work. And during that period, my son was born. So I was in and out, and
yeah, these two very separate lives, right?
Yeah, completely.
The hospital was its own space, and it didn't have anything to do with your home life, and those two didn't.
They never converged, none whatsoever.
That must have been hard.
Yeah. You're isolated.
How did you end up doing more than one tour? What's that story?
I only did one tour. So I should mention that. So I was in 3 years.
So that you signed up for 3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
And I extended 6 months because I didn't want to have to go back to the United States and be in some hospital where I'd have to do formations and uniform and that kind of stuff. I wanted to stay at the hospital. And because at the latter part of, I got out in May of 1970, they were already phasing out the hospital. And so I didn't have to do that 6 months. I finished up my tour there in Japan. So I've come to realize the guys in Vietnam, they were sent there for a year. It's a 1-year tour, a deployment for 1 year. I basically did 3 deployments, year after year after year. I got casualties from every battle in Vietnam. And what I've had a hard time dealing with all these years, 56 years to this day since I got out. People say, "Where were you during the war?" I was in Japan. Oh, lucky you. And I still get that to this day, even from Vietnam vets. That's why this story is so important.
I've thought about this because I feel like you were on the accounting side of the war in one sense, where the guy in the field, he might see a buddy get shot or he might get hurt. You got to see the total of people getting hurt. You got to see trauma in a total summation, right?
Every single day
Yeah.
for 3 years.
Yeah. You got to see the side effects of everything accumulative.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot.
And so only a year and a half ago, I had right up there on my bookshelf, there is a black hat with yellow embroidering, and it says Vietnam veteran. And one day I was at Walmart parking lot, and a guy was talking with me, and he heard my story, and he said, "Here, I've got a hat for you." And he gave me that. And I couldn't wear it because it shows the ribbons of having been in country in Vietnam. Sorry, I couldn't wear it because I hadn't earned it. So finally, after 55 years, acknowledging the impact that 3 years had on my entire life, I bought a hat that said Vietnam veteran, and it showed the American flag. And I could wear that. And I got selected to be the keynote speaker at last year's Memorial Day ceremony. And I used that example of the two hats. This hat I could never wear because I felt I didn't earn it. And this hat I wear, but I still don't feel right wearing it. Only after I've been able to deal with the shame and the guilt and the anger and realize what that's done to my life, have I been able to start to heal from that. And now I can put on my hat that says Vietnam veteran, and it shows the Vietnam Service Medal ribbon, which I have earned. Because I worked in direct support of the Vietnam War, and our hospital received a meritorious unit citation because of the direct support that we offered to the Vietnam War. And I wear that hat with pride. And I now go up to any veteran that has a hat. Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't have their hats yet, but the Vietnam veterans do. I go up to them. I go up to any plate that says, license plate that says combat veteran, Vietnam veteran, combat wounded. I will go up to them, I'll knock on their window, and I'll talk to them. If I see an arm missing, I'll say, how did you lose that? If I see a leg missing, the same thing. Because I want them to talk about it. Because I'm talking about it. And that's what heals us. I apologize.
No.
I hadn't planned on this.
No.
It's hard. But that's why I say after 56 years, you are a godsend. People need to hear this story.
There's a heavy cost of war.
Yes.
On men's lives, women's lives. And it ought to be recognized, I feel like.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, you said something about the patients and how the men you served there, how they treated you in general.
I was doc. In the Navy, that's what they called you. In the Army, that's what they called you. You're a medic, and they called you doc. And you're their hero. And they treated me that way. And again, I didn't ask for their respect. They gave it to me, which was an honor.
And you were a bit psychiatrist, a bit medical, right? You were trying to.
Yeah, and I told you the story. Again, I repeat for the third time, I'm intuitive. And I try to do things to help my patients. And when we had people that had fractured femurs, so it's a clean broken femur, you're in traction, you're going to stay there for quite a while. Or if you've lost 2 inches of femur from an AK-47 bullet, taking that out of your long bone, the femur, and they're in traction on their back 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they would be with us for at least 3 weeks.
And they're in a full body cast, right?
No, that's when,
something different.
When they go back to the mainland, they can't go in a traction bed. So they have to be put in a full body cast. And that's a cast that goes from their nipple line all the way down to the bottom of their foot on the fractured leg side, all the way down to just above the knee on their non-fractured side, and there's a cast bar between them so that those are stabilized. But in the traction, in a bed, what do you do? And it took a psychological toll on these guys. We had televisions, only in Japanese. John Wayne speaking really good Japanese. No subtitles. That didn't mean anything to him. Some had music, but basically nothing to do. And I saw that, and I'm going, these guys need a change up. They need something different. So one day I asked the nurse, I said, can I take the patient outdoors? I'm up on the second floor. The nurse kind of looked back like this and went, okay. Stabilize the traction bag. Oh, no problem. So I put a sheet over the Balkan frame that stabilizes all of that traction, and I wheeled the bed out of the ward onto the elevator, down to the first floor, out the door, onto the grass. And these guys are feeling like it's an escape. You know, they feel the breeze because the sheet that I put over the Balkan frame is rustling in the wind. They smell because the Japanese guys are cutting the grass and they can smell the cut grass. They see people walking on the street, and it just gave them hope.
Yeah, I bet that was very healing.
And then I would get guys, they're in cast, a long leg cast or an arm cast. You know, and so we would give them a little wash basin with water and a washcloth and a little bit of Physohex. I don't even know if they make that stuff anymore.
Remember that stuff.
Physohex, that green bottle. You know, and so they kind of clean themselves up, and it's still not satisfying. It's functional, but it's not satisfying. And I kept thinking about those guys, and I discovered we had some really long plastic bags. I think I put ice in them. They were like this big around and that long, and I went, ding. Let me slide that up over the cast, and I used the new paper tape that was discovered during the Vietnam War, wrapped it around their thigh, their groin area, and I'd carry these guys into the shower. I was doc. And I had respect, and I didn't want that. But it's hard. The hardest thing, I would say, about the 56-year journey And your nurse, your flight nurse on your episode,
Yeah.
number 54, somewhere around there, alluded to, I don't know what happened to the guys. That's always in my mind. You treat them, you encourage them, you change their bandages, you hold their hand, you put them on a gurney, they go out to the helicopter or to the bus, and they're gone. No name. Where did they go? Was I successful? What did they do? No idea. It's an empty hole. So I told you that I have been to 4 Vietnam walls. 1990, I was living in Taipei, Taiwan. I'd heard about the wall. My brother had been in Vietnam, so I decided to take him and my wife and my son, and we flew to Washington, D.C. in February. Big mistake. February is cold in D.C.
It is.
Oh, my gosh. I wasn't prepared for that. And I go to the wall. The wall means nothing to me. I was going for my brother. I had nothing to see there. And I get there, and my brother, within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, was going, let's go. I said, how come? He said, I don't know anyone here. And I went, what do you mean you don't know anyone? In Vietnam, we didn't know names. We had handles. Dusty, Ohio, handles. We didn't know names. I don't know anyone. Let's go. That was in 1991, we moved to Honolulu. And I think it was in 91 or 92, a little bitty, kind of like a mom and pop wall came to Pearl Harbor. And I went. I never went to see names. I don't know anyone. I know one name, and I'll tell that story in a little bit. I don't know anyone. I went hoping to find a patient. And I'm there at this little makeshift mom and pop wall. And I see a guy there, and I see what look like shrapnel wound scars all over his arm. And I go up to him and talk to him, and he tells me a story. I can't connect yet. I still haven't dealt with it. The third time, 2 years ago, the 3/4 replica size looks like the real thing came to Hilo, Hawaii. I was just starting my pilgrimage of healing, and I went to the wall. And I went to look at one name, and then the rest of the time, I was in the shadows. The 4th time I went to the wall, it went to Honolulu, the same one that was here. I had been a year in my pilgrimage. And I got there, I looked for that one name on the wall. I saw that. And then the rest of the time, I talked to anyone that was wearing a ribbon that showed they were a Vietnam veteran. I talked to anyone that was in a wheelchair, anyone that had a hat on that said Vietnam veteran. Because I was starting to connect now. I was in my healing. And there was a guy in a wheelchair, and a woman was pushing her. I didn't see her. I saw him. His hat said Vietnam veteran. And I went up to him and I grabbed his hand and I said, "Welcome home." That's what we Vietnam veterans say. I said, "Welcome home." And I asked him about his story. And about that time, I look up, and I look back down, and I do a double take, and I look up again. And the woman pushing him is his wife, and her T-shirt says Vietnam nurse. Wow. And we had an immediate connection. Your patients were my patients. We connected. Didn't get the name, didn't get a phone number, didn't get an email, didn't get a text, nothing. Gone. But
you made that connection, though.
Made that connection.
Yeah.
Now, the one name. So remember I mentioned earlier I was a collegiate gymnast. Didn't start gymnastics until I was 18. I was that strong farm kid. And I took a course. I went to a college 10 miles away from my hometown, and I took a gymnastics course. Had no idea what it was. And I excelled. And the teacher said, "You need to go to a college in eastern Oklahoma. They've got a team." So I went there the second semester of my freshman year, and I trained with them. The following year, I was on the team. I competed a year and a half. And guy from Brooklyn, Italian guy, John Cassioppo, lived on the same floor for me. The bodybuilder I mentioned earlier, he and I were great friends. And I went off to war. Never knew what happened to him. So after I got back and ended up in Oklahoma back at school again to finish my last 2 years of college, I went to the student union, and I was just getting ready to open the door, and there was like a little memorial. Oh, I just fell down to my knees. It said, "In memory." John Cassioppo. That's when my war really hit me close. I didn't even know he was in the Army. He was drafted. He was sleeping in a barracks at night when a mortar hit the barracks, and he was killed instantly. And I have family that lives in New York, and every time I go there, I look up in what used to be phone books. I look up the last name, Cassioppo. I can never bring myself to call.
Which one makes all the names on that wall come to life?
Every person has their story. And that, I tell people, there's 58,200 plus names on the wall. Those are the ones that were killed there, but that's not the number of deaths from the Vietnam War. There are hundreds of thousands more. And 100,000 of those, at least according to the VA, 22 a day are committing suicide from the Vietnam War, from the Iraq, the Afghanistan War. But there's an independent organization that says, hey, wait a minute. The VA, they will only say it's a suicide if there's a note, something direct that says it was a suicide. And this independent organization says, well, if they're overdosing, well, if they drove into a telephone pole, yeah, that's a suicide. So there's hundreds of thousands of those. There are all the ones that have died from Agent Orange. We can't forget that.
Yeah. You talked about another guy, too. Can you tell that story? The guy that you became friends with that didn't want to go back to the front, didn't want to go back to the war.
He was a medic. He was wounded, not seriously. This was during early Tet of 68.
Are you in the orthopedics ward at this point?
I'm in the orthopedic wards. And he was up on the 4th floor. These are the ones that are going to go back to Vietnam. They found out he was a combat medic, and we were overloaded with patients. And so they brought him down to work with us on the ward to help out. And he was 2 years college, just like me. We had a lot in common, and we became hooked together as best buds. Rick Duche. I remember that name, Rick Duche. And I invited him over to our house to get him out of the hospital. So my wife prepared a meal for him. He came over. And then he was getting orders to go back to Vietnam. And he said to me, Michael, he had tears in his eyes, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. And that was the end of Rick Duche for me. Physically, us being together. Mentally, he's been in my mind 56 years. And because of the internet, I search for him regularly. Never found it. Duche, can I spell it this way? Can I spell it that way? Do I look for Rick? Do I look for Richard? I looked every way that I could think of. I knew it was from somewhere back east. I never thought about looking on the wall. So here, probably 2 months ago, that idea came to me, and I went, is there anyone with the last name Duche? And it comes back, Richard Duche, combat medic, November 1968, on wall panel X, line X. The cost.
How did it end, Vietnam, for you?
Well, if I literally hear that sentence, it's never ended. But if I assume that you're talking about the end of my tour, I didn't want to go back to the States. A year before I was to get out, I had decided I cannot go back to the States. I can't live with that. I didn't know it at the time, but it was shame and guilt and anger. Australia had an immigration policy, and it was whites only. I didn't know that at the time, but I'm a white man, my wife is a white woman, and my child is a white baby, and we were accepted to go to Australia as immigrants, and we did. But I had to go back to the States from latter May until August, till we went to Australia. So went back to the States, fly. Remember, 3 years, I haven't had any contact with any family. I couldn't make a phone call. I didn't write the letters. My wife wrote all the letters. I didn't have time for that. No contact whatsoever. I had no idea what was going on. I was proud of my work. Fly into Oakland Army Base. I'm there 13 hours getting discharged. I'm ready to go out to get on a bus to be taken to San Francisco Airport. And the sergeant says, change out of your uniform into civilian clothes. I had no idea what that meant. So I go out with my wife and my infant child. We get on a bus, and there's a gigantic protest out there. Baby killers, get out of Vietnam. People yelling at us, throwing things. They were far enough from me, so I never got spit upon, but I'm sure many of them would have liked to have spit upon me, not knowing what I did. So I get on the plane, I fly to Oklahoma, well, I fly to Amarillo, Texas, and it's a 3-hour drive for my parents to pick me up and take me back to Oklahoma, the little town Guyman in the middle of the Panhandle, and to get into the house. And the first thing that my mother and father say to me, we don't want to hear anything about the war. We don't want to hear anything about what you did. Pushed down inside. Again. And then we leave for Australia. And we were there 6 months. My wife hated it. And I understand. I came from a home of physical and psychological abuse. And so the reason I started working with a paper route at age 12, all that stuff got me out of the house. And then I worked on a farm, and I was used to working 12, 14 hours a day on a farm, driving a tractor, driving a combine. So I was used to hard work. But my wife was raised with a close family, and she wanted to be by her family, and I didn't. I didn't want to be with the United States, and I didn't want to be with my family. And she hated it. Every day I was crying, and I understand it now. And I just got angry one day and said, okay, we're going back. And we went back. And then, so I enrolled in school. Before I went to the war, my grade point was 1.8. Wasn't very serious about studying. I didn't know how to study. When I went back, I had a double major, biology and physical education, and I was a 4.0 student. And then I got accepted to graduate school. My specialization was in ornithology. Got accepted to graduate school up in Vermillion, South Dakota, University of South Dakota. And I went, so when I went back for undergraduate work, I basically buried myself. That's the same MO that I had during the war, the same MO when I would work to get out of my household.
You throw yourself at something, yeah.
So when I went up to graduate school, it was like someone pulled the rug out from under me. This is 1973. Well, people need to know these stories, so I'm going to go back a little bit. So I'm in my undergraduate work. I'm a father, and my wife thinks that I need to be spending more time with my child, but I'm buried in my studies. I had a friend that I knew before I went to the military. He went to Vietnam, and he and I were talking. He came back to school. We were there at the same time. We were old, 25. These kids are 18.
Right.
And I told him, I said, my wife and I we're having problems. He's single. And he said, I don't know what to do. And he goes, you slap her. So one evening, when my wife said something to me at the kitchen table about I need to spend more time with my child, I just flipped the chair behind me, flipped over another child, went over to her and slapped her. Not hard, but I slapped her. And I knew then at that moment I had crossed a line. That was the first moment that I realized I'm not the same person that I was before February of 1967. But then I let it go. Went on, got my degree, went to graduate school. And now everything is different. I'm living in a farmhouse 10 miles away from the university. I'm living in a farmhouse. And things just got out of control. I never drank. I never did drugs. I was an athlete. And since I wasn't spending enough time with my child or my wife, that meant that I was a horrible father and a horrible husband. And I remember saying to my wife, you don't deserve to be married to me. I'm taking you back to Oklahoma, because she didn't want to be in South Dakota either. I'm taking you back to Oklahoma. And I separated from her for a year. And in that year, it was chaos. I had a girlfriend. Wasn't a girlfriend. It was just a person that I was with. And there were so many times I remember thinking, if I drive my car into that pole, or if I roll it off of the hill, but I can't do that because she doesn't deserve that, this girl. I didn't do it. And one night I'm in the farmhouse with her, and I don't know what happened. You block things out. And I just went, I can't do this anymore. I went to the closet, pulled out my 12-gauge shotgun, and I put one shell in the chamber. I already knew where I was going and what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. I knew the tree that I would lean against. I knew how I would pull the trigger with my big toe. And I was walking out the door with that shotgun, and the girl said to me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to get some up." What the hell does that mean? For me, it meant anything is better than what I've got now. And she grabbed my arm. I'm strong, but she pulled. I allowed her to pull me back. Inwardly I knew I did not want to die. And I slammed my hand through the glass window of the storm door. And I'm standing there with blood dripping down onto the faded linoleum floor and crying like a baby. This is 1973. And she said, "You need some help." So Monday I went to the university doctor, young guy. I'm certain he had never dealt with anything like this. I tell him part of my story because I'm still very protective, extremely protective. I was there with him 15 minutes, and he said, "I think you're going to be okay." And I knew there's something wrong with me. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to die. So I dropped out of graduate school, bought a 10-speed JCPenney bicycle, embroidered love on one side of my cutoff pants, peace on the other side. People would ask me, "What are you doing?" And I would tell them, "I'm going to see my son in Oklahoma, and I'm looking for peace and love." They thought I was a hippie.
And you got on your bike and rode?
Yeah. Only made it as far as central Nebraska. Ended up a severe case of tendinitis. Could hardly walk. That's a whole other story. Went back. I did reunite with my wife and child. We were together for another 7 years, but this stuff still hadn't been dealt with. It was still buried down inside. And then my wife had not dealt. She didn't know how to deal with me. She didn't know what I had. I didn't even know what I had. And we were together for another 7 years, and she could never forgive me. And I understand that now. It's not her fault. Truth being, it's not my fault. I went to nursing school, 3-year program. I did a year and a half. I was going to be an RN because I wanted to help people. I couldn't do it. There were so many triggers. I would get so frustrated because these nurses had no idea what I had done, I had done things that they will never do in their career. And they're trying to tell me what to do. I dropped out. And then I found out that I could be a missionary. I don't want to go in that whole story.
That's fine. You can skip around whatever you want.
But as a missionary, I could go to another country. And that's what I wanted. Down inside, I wanted to leave. That was my safe place. So I went as a missionary to Costa Rica. I loved it. Now I had a full face of facial hair. I learned a language. I learned a culture. I was a completely different person. I had been reborn, not as Mike, but as Michael. That was my safe space. And then I finished my year of language school and went to Colombia, where my assignment was to be a recreation director in a mission program. And It was during the time of Pablo Escobar. I'm going to go through all that story.
But you met your wife there? That became your wife?
She became my wife. She's been my savior.
Lovely lady.
She's kept me alive for 43 years. We've been married now. There's an interesting thing. Wives, and now I have to say wives and husbands because we do have military wives. And in Vietnam, you had nurses that were wives. You had donut dollies that were women. Your spouse, not having taken the path that you've taken, they will never understand it. They can empathize with you, but they will never understand it. And my wife has given me the freedom. When we moved onto our property in 2010, we lived in a shipping container for 5 months, a 20-foot shipping container for 5 months while we built our house, which we're still building 15 years later. A very tolerant woman.
Tell me about when you came to realize what it was you were struggling with.
So when I got out of the military in 1970, PTSD was not a diagnosis and did not become a diagnosis until 1980.
Right.
In 1973, when I was struggling, I was taking a class which I ended up with an incomplete because I withdrew from graduate school. But I was doing a research project for that class in educational psychology. And I went to the university library and there was something that struck me about a magazine that I was reading. It was a research article in a psychology magazine. And it was this person talking about symptoms of war veterans in 1973. And I'm reading that and I'm going, that's me. That's me. That's me. But it can't be me because he's talking about combat veterans. I wasn't in combat. That can't be me. And that was ingrained into my mind. And I never thought anything different, even though I knew there were things there. I had a friend came here. He and his wife were on a cruise. I picked them up. We brought them here. They had lunch with us. Then we took them back down to the cruise ship. He was a chopper pilot in Vietnam. And he would listen to a small part of my story about the work in the hospital. And he said, Michael, you need to get connected with the VA. First of all, you need to get health care. I didn't even have health care. I'm in my late 70s and I never had health care. You need to sign, you qualify for health care. I do. I didn't even consider myself a veteran. And he said, and he's the one that first planted the idea that you need to go to the VA. And then I got health care through the VA. And it was determined that I had a deviated septum, a broken nose, and that I was going to have surgery on that. Well, let me go back a little bit. I had a very close friend here. He and I are the same age. He wasn't in Vietnam. He was a military intelligence oxymoron. Very close friend, and we really confided one into the other. And he developed adrenal cancer, didn't even know it. It was metastatic. And all of a sudden, within a period of 6 weeks, he was admitted to the hospital, and then he was dead. That quick. I went up to the hospital 3 days before he died. And then at the same time, I was scheduled to have my deviated septum surgery, and I just went off the deep end. Just like 1973, that scared the hell out of me. I thought it was because of my friend and his passing. Later, I realized, no, That was the first time I'd been in a hospital since 1970, and it triggered me just like that. And so now I went to the vet center. We Vietnam veterans, we didn't trust the VA. Still don't. But I knew about the vet center. And so I went to the vet center here. And I went in and I said, I need to talk to a counselor. And because of the current administration cutbacks, one counselor had retired. They only had one there. And she said, I'm booked until Tuesday. I can't meet with you. The surgery's on Monday. I was so angry. I came back here. I needed to vent. I made an 8-minute video of me ranting out there, walking back and forth, filming. I posted it on YouTube. But that scared me. And then so someone told me, you need to file for PTSD. So I got what's called a VSO, a Veteran Service Officer. And I went to that person. I thought, this is the person that's going to help me. And he said, you need to file for Agent Orange. You need to file for back pain. You need to file for PTSD. You need to file. He had like 10 things that I needed to file for. And so I trusted this man. And because of him, I mailed these in. And then 4 or 5 weeks later, it comes back, denied, 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 denied. But I know there's something going on. But the VA said, you're denied everything. So I changed VSOs. I got another guy, fantastic. He's my guardian angel. He walked me through the whole process. I went to a psychologist, and the psychologist diagnosed me. And he said, this is a person with chronic PTSD. Even though he has never set foot in Vietnam, and he is a poster child of PTSD. That's when I started getting my help. And I'm involved in a vet group now. It's called Art for Healing. We meet 2 times a month. We work on art.
And for how many years you've been doing the mosaic?
For 25 years. So when I was a gymnast and we had gymnastic business in Honolulu, we sold that. I was 55 and no one would hire a 55-year-old man. And I needed to do something with my hands. And so in our condo, my first mosaic was 4 feet wide, 8 feet high. And it's just been nonstop since. And as you've seen, our whole house is basically mosaic, or will be.
It's story, it's art, it's you, it's your wife.
It's my therapy, it's my healing. Yeah.
I feel like, if I was going to advise guys dealing with that, I feel like a creative outlet is a good idea no matter what it is.
Whether you write or whether you can do art with your hand.
Or music or
wood burn, music, anything.
Yeah.
It's an outlet.
It's a good release valve.
Yeah.
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 The people you worked with, what do you have to say about that? Your time there, the people you actually worked with that were dedicated like
the
you
staff.
were. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So May 19th, one of the clinical techs called me at 6 o'clock in the morning and he goes, Reader, you're going home. And 5 days later, I was on a plane. I never got to say goodbye to patients. I never got to say goodbye to the staff. And that haunted me, just like never knowing where the patients went with the advent of the internet. So there were certain people that really stuck out in my time. Captain Brilliant, he was a head nurse in D1, Orthopedics, first floor. Captain Gumber, head nurse on the second floor. Captain Mertz, she was assistant nurse on the second floor. And Lieutenant Gunnell. And I kept going on the internet, searching and searching and searching. I could never find anyone. My wife and I were at my niece's house in the Dominican Republic. We were there 3 months. We had access to Wi-Fi. And I had a whole lot of time available in between working on a mosaic for her, and I would search on the internet. I came across Lieutenant or Captain Mertz. I'd been spelling her name wrong, and I found her. So we're there. I don't remember the month or the year right now, but what I found was her obituary. She had died just a couple of months before I found her on the internet. It was a blow. Same thing happened to Captain Gunnell. A blow. And the same thing that happened to Captain Brilliant. Another blow. Lieutenant Gunnell, he's going to see this. Different story. I don't even remember how we connected. He retired as a lieutenant colonel, stayed in the nursing corps, and had nothing but good things to say about me. He wrote a buddy letter for me in my appeal to the VA for my disability. And then come to find out, I lived in Honolulu for 19 years. He was stationed at Tripler Hospital, the main Army hospital in Honolulu when I was there. Didn't have the internet and I couldn't find him. But we've connected by way of phone and Facebook. Yeah.
Looking back at your time, what do you think now? Where are you at?
In a month and a half, I'll be 80. I could die tomorrow. And this is the happiest point completely in my life in 56 years. It's like everything has come around. I'm going back to Japan. My wife said, for your 80th birthday, I want us to go back to Japan. And I kept telling people, my wife wants us to go back to Japan. My wife wants us to go back to Japan. I was denying that. I wasn't saying we are going back. She wants, because I hadn't reached that point where I could say, I want to go back. It was scary. But in September the 23rd till the 7th of October, I will have my 80th birthday in Japan. And we will go to the place where the hospital was.
It's not there any longer, is it?
It's not there any longer. In 1991, I had a chance to go back, and I went back specifically to go to where the hospital was, and I found out it was a park. And I'm walking through that park, 35 acres, beautiful park. There are young couples in love having a picnic. There are kids sliding down green grass hills on cardboard. There are old couples walking the paved paths through the park. There's so much joy there. I cried. What more could you ask for of a place from so much suffering, so much joy? And now I'm ready to go back. I'll cry, but it will be crying tears of joy. And my wife will be there to share that with me. So, I don't know how much longer I will live. Every day for me is a blessing. I'm healthy. I'm very active. Nonstop. I'm still a workaholic. But it's like my flower is blooming. So that's why I say this is an extremely joyful period of my life. And And I have to say, I get to share that with so many other people. The younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan that I go up to. I know how to get past the, excuse me for saying this, but I know how to get past the bullshit. I go right to the heart.
Oh.
And they open up to me. I'm still Doc. I know how to talk to them. And I offer them hope. Because they say, oh, you guys from Vietnam, you went through so much stuff. And we haven't had to go through what you had to go through. That's hope for them. But the other hope I offer them is they look at me and they go, my God, you're 80 years old. I'm 45. I'm 48. I can make it. That's hope.
Well, you helped a lot of people over there.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see you come full circle and understand. When you're young, you don't understand a lot.
No,
you can be mad at your wife for stuff that you don't understand. And when you get older, you can forgive that and go, oh, that makes sense to me now.
Yeah. I'm hoping my ex-wife, a good person, I'm hoping that she'll see this. It will help her understand a lot about the impact it had on her life for the rest of her life.
Imagine how lonely that existence was for her. That must have been really hard to be in a foreign place.
Yeah.
And you're throwing yourself into something that's so important.
My son has come around from that also.
Yeah.
He's seen my pilgrimage.
Yeah.
He understands it now. My grandson is seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's why I say this video is not just for the staff that I worked with and the doctors and the nurses and the patients, it's for the kids and the grandkids.
Yeah. And there's a cost to all that, right? And you can't really be really good throwing yourself at that and be good at domestic at the same time when that's going on. I don't think.
Yeah.
It's a lot more complex than that.
And you have to recognize that when you go through that, it changes you. There's no way you can even go through basic training and not be changed. If you're aware of that, if you're made aware of it, if you're counseled to become aware of it, you can survive it. You can live with it.
Anything else you want to say? Any other stories? Anything else?
I'm tired.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. All right, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.